My name is Elena Martinez, I'm 34 years old, and I thought I knew my best friend better than anyone else in the world. 22 years of friendship had taught me Victoria's patterns. The way she tilted her head when lying, how her voice pitched higher when she was nervous, the practiced smile she wore when hiding something important. But standing in her pristine living room that autumn morning, surrounded by what she claimed was the wreckage of her perfect life, I realized I had been blind to the most elaborate deception I'd ever witnessed. The emergency call had come at 6 a.m., Victoria's voice breaking through sobs that seemed too theatrical even for her. "Elena, please come. James left me. He took everything. I have nothing left." My husband Marcus had tried to stop me from rushing over, his dark eyes filled with concern that I couldn't understand then. "Something doesn't add up," he'd said, but I was already grabbing my keys. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. Now, 3 hours later, I stood in Victoria's million-dollar home in the hills of Malibu, watching her pace back and forth in designer clothes while claiming to be destitute. The contradiction should have been obvious, but I was still trapped in the web of our history, still the college roommate who'd helped her through her eating disorder, still the maid of honor who'd organized her fairy tale wedding, still the friend who never questioned why Victoria's crises always seemed to coincide with my own moments of happiness. What I didn't know then was that everything, the marriage, the business, even the breakdown I was witnessing, was part of a carefully orchestrated performance designed to hide the truth about who Victoria Ashford really was. And by the time I discovered what lay beneath the glittering surface of her life, it would cost me everything I thought I knew about trust, loyalty, and the price of willful blindness. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. I was in my home office, reviewing case files for my family therapy practice, when my phone buzzed with Victoria's frantic call. Her voice was raw, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "Elena, I need you. James is gone. He's really gone this time." I'd heard variations of this crisis before. Victoria and James's marriage had always been volatile, passionate highs followed by dramatic lows that usually ended with Victoria on my doorstep, tearful and seeking comfort. But something in her voice that morning felt different. "Final?" "I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for my jacket. Marcus looked up from his coffee, concern creasing his forehead. At 41, my husband was a man who noticed details, part of what made him such a successful investigative journalist. "Another crisis?" "James left her for real this time," I explained, checking my purse for keys. "She sounds completely broken." Marcus set down his mug carefully. "Elena, have you ever wondered why Victoria's emergencies always happen when you have something good going on?" I paused at the question. It was true that Victoria's crises had an uncanny timing. The night before my thesis defense in graduate school, she'd called in tears about a cheating boyfriend. The week I'd gotten engaged to Marcus, she'd been hospitalized for what doctors couldn't definitively diagnose. The day I'd opened my private practice, she'd needed emergency surgery that turned out to be unnecessary. "She's been through a lot," I said defensively. "Some people just have more drama in their lives." "Or some people create drama," Marcus said quietly. But I was already walking out the door. The drive to Victoria's house took 45 minutes through winding canyon roads. I'd made this journey countless times over the years, usually in response to some crisis or celebration. Victoria's home was a testament to her success, a sprawling modern masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She and James had bought it 3 years ago when her lifestyle brand, Elevated Living, had exploded into a multi-million-dollar empire. I pulled into the circular driveway, noting that James's Tesla was indeed gone. Victoria's white Range Rover sat alone in the 4-car garage, looking somehow forlorn in the vast space. I knocked on the front door, but it swung open before my knuckles made contact. "Elena!" Victoria threw herself into my arms, her tall, willowy frame shaking with sobs. She looked stunning even in her distress, platinum blonde hair perfectly tousled, makeup artfully smudged to suggest tears without actual redness or puffiness. At 33, Victoria had the kind of beauty that seemed effortless but I knew required hours of daily maintenance. What happened? I asked, steering her inside. The house was immaculate as always, every surface gleaming, every decorative object precisely placed. If this was the scene of a marital breakdown, it was the tittiest one I'd ever seen. He took everything, Victoria whispered, collapsing onto her white leather sectional. The business accounts, the investments, even my grandmother's jewelry. I woke up this morning and he was gone. No note, no explanation. Just gone. I sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. What do you mean he took everything? How is that possible? Victoria's blue eyes filled with fresh tears. I trusted him completely. He handled all our finances, said I didn't need to worry about money because I was the creative one. But he had access to everything, the business accounts, my personal savings, even the trust fund my parents set up. The story poured out in broken fragments. James, her husband of 5 years, had apparently been planning this escape for months. He'd systematically transferred money out of their joint accounts, liquidated investments, and even sold valuable artwork. By the time Victoria discovered what was happening, he was gone and her bank accounts were empty. How much are we talking about? I asked gently. Millions, Victoria sobbed. Everything I've worked for since college. The business is gone, Elena. Elevated living is finished. I can't even make payroll for my employees. I held her while she cried, my mind reeling. Elevated living wasn't just a business, it was a lifestyle empire that Victoria had built from nothing. What started as a blog about wellness and luxury living had grown into a company with products, retreats, and a devoted following of women who wanted to emulate Victoria's seemingly perfect life. We need to call the police, I said. This is theft fraud. There has to be something they can do. Victoria shook her head violently. No police. Please, Elena. I can't handle any more humiliation. The media would destroy me if this got out. My brand is based on having the perfect life, the perfect marriage. If people knew the truth. She trailed off, staring out the massive windows at the ocean below. In the afternoon light, she looked fragile and young, more like the college student I'd first befriended than the successful entrepreneur she'd become. What about your parents? I suggested. Your father's got connections, resources. Surely he could help track down James or at least freeze the remaining assets. Something flickered across Victoria's face, an expression I couldn't quite read. My parents, they've already done so much for me. I can't ask them for more money. They'll think I'm irresponsible, that I should have known better. I squeezed her hand. They love you. They want to help. You don't understand, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper. There are things about my relationship with my parents that I've never told you. Things about the money, about how my business really got started. A chill ran through me at her tone. What kind of things? Victoria stood abruptly, walking to the window. With her back to me, she seemed to be gathering courage for what came next. My trust fund, it doesn't exist anymore. I spent it all years ago before elevated living took off. The business was failing, Elena. I was drowning in debt and I made some bad decisions. What kind of bad decisions? She turned to face me and for the first time that day her tears looked genuine. I took money from people. Investors who believed in my vision. I told them their money was going into the business, but I used it to pay personal debts, to maintain the lifestyle that I thought was necessary for my brand. My stomach dropped. Victoria, that's fraud, she finished. I know. But I always intended to pay them back. And I did eventually. When the business took off, I paid back every penny. But James knew about it. He had documentation, records of everything. He's been holding it over me for years. The room felt smaller suddenly, the perfect white walls closing in around us. I tried to process what Victoria was telling me. My best friend, the woman I'd admired for her business acumen and success, was confessing to fraud. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly. Because I was ashamed. And because I thought I'd left it all behind. The business was legitimate now, profitable. I thought the past didn't matter anymore. But it did matter. As Victoria continued talking, a picture emerged of a marriage built on mutual blackmail and financial manipulation. James had known about Victoria's past indiscretions and had used that knowledge to control their relationship. In turn, Victoria had discovered that James was embezzling from her company, skimming money from business accounts and hiding it in offshore investments. So when he left, Victoria said, he didn't just take the money. He took the evidence of his own crimes too. If I report him to the police, he'll expose what I did years ago. My reputation will be destroyed and I'll probably go to prison. The elegant trap was becoming clear. Victoria was financially ruined but couldn't seek legal recourse without destroying herself in the process. It was a masterpiece of mutual assured destruction, and James had somehow found a way to escape unscathed. There has to be something we can do, I said, though I couldn't imagine what. Victoria sat back down beside me, taking my hands in hers. There is one thing. But I hate to ask. Here it comes, I thought. The request that would somehow implicate me in this mess. Victoria had a talent for drawing others into her problems, making her crises become their emergencies. I need a loan, she said simply. Just enough to cover my immediate expenses while I figure out how to rebuild. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only person I trust completely. How much? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be more than Marcus and I could afford. 200,000, she said. I know it sounds like a fortune, but Elena, I'm desperate. Without it, I'll lose the house, the business, everything. I'll pay you back with interest as soon as I can liquidate some assets and figure out a payment plan with my creditors. $200,000. It was more than Marcus and I had in our savings account, though not by much. We'd been conservative with money, saving for years to buy our own home in an expensive housing market. But lending that money to Victoria would mean delaying our own plans indefinitely. I need to talk to Marcus, I said carefully. Victoria's grip on my hands tightened. Of course. But Elena, please don't mention the details about my past. The fewer people who know about that, the better. Just tell him James cleaned out the accounts and I need help getting back on my feet. I nodded, though something about her request bothered me. Victoria had always been secretive about her business dealings, claiming that the details were too boring or complex for others to understand. But now I wondered if there were other secrets she'd been keeping. The drive home gave me time to think. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that should have been beautiful but felt ominous instead. Victoria's story had holes in it, logical inconsistencies that my therapist training had taught me to notice. If James had been planning this theft for months, why hadn't Victoria noticed money disappearing from their accounts? If her business was as successful as she claimed, why was she so dependent on personal savings to keep it running? And why had she seemed more concerned about her reputation than about the actual theft of millions of dollars? Marcus was in our kitchen when I arrived home, stirring a pot of something that smelled like tomatoes and garlic. He looked up as I entered, his expression immediately focusing on my face. That bad? He asked. I sank into a chair at our kitchen table. Worse than I thought. I told him a simplified version of Victoria's story, the theft, the empty accounts, the request for a loan. I left out the parts about fraud and blackmail, honoring Victoria's request for discretion. But even the sanitized version left Marcus looking skeptical. 200,000? He set down his spoon and turned to face me fully. Elena, that's our entire down payment fund. I know. But she's desperate, Marcus. And she's always been good for money she's borrowed in the past. When has Victoria ever borrowed money from us? I opened my mouth to answer, then realized I couldn't think of a specific example. Victoria had certainly had financial crises before, but now that I thought about it, she'd always found other solutions. Family money, business loans, mysterious windfalls that she never quite explained. She'll pay us back, I said, though the words sounded weak even to me. Marcus sat down across from me, his dark eyes serious. Elena, I need to tell you something. I've been looking into Victoria's business for an article I'm working on about influencer marketing. There are some red flags. My stomach tightened. What kind of red flags? Financial irregularities. Elevated living shows massive revenue streams, but the expenses don't add up. Either she's hiding money from the tax authorities or she's hiding debts from her investors. Maybe both. You investigated my best friend without telling me? I investigated a public figure whose business model didn't make sense, Marcus said firmly. The fact that she's your friend made me more curious, not less. Elena, I don't think Victoria's business is as successful as she claims. I think she's been running a sophisticated shell game for years. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's impossible. I've seen the success. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. You can't fake that level of wealth. You can if you're very good at moving money around and very comfortable with debt, Marcus said quietly. Elena, think about it. When was the last time you actually saw documentation of Victoria's success? Financial statements, tax returns, anything concrete? I couldn't answer because I'd never seen any of those things. Victoria had always been private about her finances, claiming that money talk made her uncomfortable. I'd assumed it was because she was wealthy enough that discussing money felt vulgar or unnecessary. Even if you're right, I said finally, she's still my friend. She's still in trouble. Is she? Marcus asked. Or is this another performance designed to get what she wants? The question stung because it echoed thoughts I'd been trying to suppress. Victoria's crisis did have the same theatrical quality as her previous emergencies. The perfect staging, the dramatic timing, the request for help that would require significant sacrifice from me. I can't just abandon her, I said. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be careful. Don't give her the money until we know more about what's really going on. That night, I lay awake thinking about my friendship with Victoria. We'd met in college, two small-town girls trying to make it in Los Angeles. Victoria had been everything I wasn't, confident, glamorous, effortlessly popular. She'd taken me under her wing, introducing me to the right people, teaching me how to dress and speak and navigate the social hierarchies of our elite university. But looking back with adult eyes, I could see patterns I'd missed as a young woman. Victoria's friendships were always strategic. She collected people who could be useful to her, the smart girl who could help with homework, the rich girl who could provide connections, the pretty girl who made her look even more desirable by comparison. I'd been the smart girl. The one who wrote her papers when she was too busy partying, who provided emotional support during her frequent romantic dramas, who could be counted on to be available whenever Victoria needed something. In return, I got proximity to her glamorous life and the feeling that I was special, chosen by someone who could have anyone as a friend. The pattern had continued after college. Victoria's career in lifestyle blogging had taken off just as I was struggling to establish my therapy practice. She'd often called for advice about business strategies or emotional intelligence, picking my brain about psychology and human behavior. I'd been flattered by her interest in my expertise, not realizing that she was essentially getting free consulting services. Even her romantic relationships followed a similar pattern. Victoria was drawn to successful, wealthy men who could provide her with financial security and social status. But she also seemed to need them to be slightly flawed or vulnerable in some way, giving her leverage in the relationship. James had fit the pattern perfectly. A successful tech entrepreneur with social anxiety and a complicated relationship with his wealthy family. Victoria had rescued him from his isolation, teaching him how to navigate social situations and family dynamics. In return, he'd provided the financial backing and business connections that had allowed elevated living to grow from a blog into an empire. But what if Marcus was right? What if that empire was built on debt and deception rather than genuine success? What if Victoria's entire life was an elaborate performance designed to maintain an illusion of success? The next morning, I called Victoria to check on her and to stall for time before making a decision about the loan. She sounded calmer than she had the day before, though there was still an edge of desperation in her voice. I've been thinking all night, she said. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe I needed this crisis to force me to start over, to build something real this time. This time? I asked. A pause. I mean, to rebuild what James destroyed. Elena, I know you need to talk to Marcus about the loan, but please don't wait too long. I have bills due this week, and without some immediate cash flow, I'll have to start laying off employees. After we hung up, I found myself looking up elevated living online, really examining it for the first time instead of just admiring it from a distance. Marcus was right about the financial irregularities. The company claimed to have dozens of employees and multiple revenue streams, but their office address was just a P.O. box. Their product lines were manufactured by third-party companies and drop-shipped directly to customers, meaning Victoria never actually handled inventory. Most telling was the company's social media presence. Victoria had millions of followers, but the engagement on her posts was suspiciously low. Comments came from accounts with generic usernames and profile pictures that looked like stock photos. It was possible that Victoria had been buying fake followers and engagement to inflate her apparent influence. I spent the morning falling down a rabbit hole of investigation, following links and cross-referencing information until a pattern emerged. Elevated living wasn't just a business built on debt, it was a business built on the illusion of success. Victoria had created a feedback loop where the appearance of wealth attracted real money from investors and brand partnerships, which funded the lifestyle that maintained the appearance of wealth. But it was an unsustainable model. Eventually, the debts would outweigh the income, and the whole structure would collapse. The only question was whether Victoria's current crisis was the natural result of that inevitable collapse, or whether she had orchestrated it herself for some other purpose. My phone rang just as I was closing my laptop. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. Elena, thank God you answered. Something terrible has happened. What now? James contacted me. He's not just gone, he's dead. The words hit like ice water. What do you mean dead? Car accident in Mexico. The police called his brother this morning. He was driving drunk and hit a tree. Victoria's voice was shaking. Elena, this changes everything. If James is dead, I might be able to recover some of the money. But I need to get to Mexico immediately to deal with the legal issues. Slow down, I said, my mind reeling. When did this happen? 2 days ago, apparently. Right after he left me. The Mexican authorities have been trying to identify him, but he wasn't carrying ID. Something about the timing felt wrong. If James had died 2 days ago, why was Victoria only hearing about it now? And why would the police call his brother instead of his wife? Victoria, this doesn't make sense. If you're his next of kin. We weren't legally married, she interrupted. I mean, we had a ceremony, but we never filed the paperwork. It was a spiritual commitment, not a legal one. His family never approved of me, so James thought it would be easier to keep the marriage private. Another piece of information that Victoria had never shared. How many other secrets had she been keeping? I need to fly to Mexico tonight, Victoria continued. But I don't have access to any money for travel expenses. Elena, I hate to ask, but could you help me with airfare and hotel costs? Just a few $1,000s. Once I sort out the legal issues, I'll be able to access James's accounts. Let me call you back, I said quickly, hanging up before she could respond. I immediately dialed Marcus. Victoria says James is dead. What? I explained the car accident, the timing, the revelation about their marriage not being legal. Marcus listened without interrupting, but I could hear him typing in the background. Elena, I'm looking at traffic reports from Mexico. There's no record of any fatal accidents involving Americans in the past week. My blood ran cold. Maybe it happened in a remote area, or maybe the reports haven't been filed yet. Maybe, Marcus said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Or maybe Victoria is lying. Why would she lie about something like that? Because it solves all her problems. If James is dead, she doesn't have to worry about him exposing her past. If there's no legal marriage, she can claim to be his common-law wife and potentially inherit his assets. And if you believe she's grieving, you're more likely to give her the money she's asking for. The coldness of the calculation took my breath away. Could Victoria really be capable of faking her husband's death? I need to see proof, I said. Good. Don't give her a penny until you see a death certificate, police reports, something official. When I called Victoria back, she seemed flustered by my request for documentation. Elena, I don't have access to official records yet. That's why I need to get to Mexico. But his brother confirmed it. You could call him if you want. She gave me a phone number, which I immediately passed to Marcus. 20 minutes later, he called me back. The number goes to a prepaid cell phone registered under a fake name, he said. Elena, this is all fabricated. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. For over 20 years, I had trusted Victoria completely, defending her against critics, supporting her through crises, believing in her success and her friendship. But now I was being forced to confront the possibility that everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. What do I do? I asked Marcus. You confront her. But not alone. I'm coming with you. We drove to Victoria's house in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the canyon roads. I thought about all the times I had made this drive before, rushing to Victoria's side in moments of crisis. How many of those crises had been real? Victoria answered the door before we knocked, as if she had been watching for our arrival. She looked surprised to see Marcus with me, and I caught a flicker of something, calculation perhaps, in her blue eyes. Marcus, what a surprise. I didn't know you were coming. We need to talk, I said, stepping past her into the house. Victoria's living room felt different this time, less like a home and more like a stage set. The perfect white furniture, the carefully placed art objects, the fresh flowers that somehow always seemed to be in bloom, it all looked artificial now that I was seeing it with suspicious eyes. I've been doing some research, Marcus said without preamble. About your business, about James, about this supposed car accident. Victoria's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but… There was no car accident, Marcus interrupted. There are no Mexican police reports, no death certificate, no record of James being in Mexico at all. Victoria sank onto her white leather couch, her hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might maintain the deception, continue spinning elaborate lies to cover her tracks. But something in her face crumpled and the mask finally slipped away. You don't understand, she whispered. I had to do something. The business is failing, Elena. It's been failing for months. I'm millions of dollars in debt, and I've been using new investments to pay off old ones. It's a Ponzi scheme, basically, and it's about to collapse. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. Where is James? I asked quietly. Gone. Really gone. But not dead. I paid him to disappear, to take the blame for the missing money. He's somewhere in South America now, probably laughing about how easy it was. You paid him with what money? Victoria's laugh was bitter. Money I borrowed from other investors. Money I told them was going into expanding the business. Elena, it's all falling apart. In a few weeks, maybe days, people are going to start asking questions I can't answer. The scope of the deception was staggering. Victoria hadn't just lied about James's death. She had been running a fraudulent business for years, stealing money from investors to fund her lifestyle and pay off previous debts. So what was the plan? Marcus asked, his journalist instincts taking over. Frame James for the theft and start over with a clean slate? Something like that, Victoria admitted. If I could get enough sympathy money to cover my immediate debts, I could restructure the business, find legitimate revenue streams. I just needed time. And you thought I would give you $200,000 based on a lie about your husband's death? Victoria looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Elena, you've always been there for me. I hoped you would understand. I was desperate. The words hit like a slap. After everything, the friendship, the trust, the years of support, Victoria had been willing to manipulate my grief and sympathy to steal money from me. "Get out," I said quietly. "Elena, please. Get out of my life. Don't call me, don't text me, don't contact me ever again." Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally, something that might have been genuine regret. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "Yes, you did," I replied. "This is exactly how far you meant for it to go." Marcus and I left without another word. As we drove away, I saw Victoria standing in her doorway, watching us leave. Even in that moment, she looked like she was performing, the abandoned friend, the tragic victim of circumstance. The next few weeks brought a cascade of revelations as Victoria's financial empire finally collapsed. Investors who had trusted her with their retirement savings found themselves facing bankruptcy. Employees who had believed in her vision lost their jobs without severance pay. Vendors who had extended credit based on her reputation were left holding worthless invoices. The media coverage was extensive and brutal. Victoria had courted publicity for years, building her brand on the foundation of her seemingly perfect life. Now that same media attention turned against her as reporters uncovered the full scope of her fraud. I watched it all from a distance, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing Victoria finally face consequences for her actions, but also grief for the friendship I had lost and guilt for not seeing the warning signs sooner. The most difficult part was testifying at Victoria's trial. As one of her closest friends, I was called to provide character evidence, to speak about her behavior and motivations. I tried to be honest without being vindictive, to acknowledge both the genuine care she had shown me over the years and the manipulation that had colored our entire relationship. The courtroom was packed with Victoria's victims: elderly investors who had trusted her with their retirement funds, young entrepreneurs who had believed in her mentorship, vendors who had extended credit based on her reputation. Seeing their faces, understanding the real human cost of Victoria's deception, made the betrayal feel even more profound. Victoria sat at the defendant's table in a simple navy dress, her famous platinum hair pulled back in a modest bun. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without the designer clothes and professional styling that had been part of her armor for so many years. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I had never seen before in Victoria's face: genuine shame. The prosecutor was thorough in his questioning, walking me through our friendship chronologically. How had I met Victoria? What had our relationship been like in college? When had I first noticed signs of her business success? Had she ever asked me for money before? That last question hit harder than I expected. The answer was no. Victoria had never directly asked me for money until that final desperate request for $200,000. But as I thought about it more deeply, I realized she had been extracting value from our friendship in other ways for years. The free therapy sessions disguised as casual conversations about her relationships. The business advice I had provided without charge, drawing on my psychology training to help her understand customer behavior and market dynamics. The emotional labor I had performed, being available at all hours to support her through various crises and celebrations. I had been paying into the friendship for decades without realizing it, providing services that would have cost Victoria tens of thousands of dollars if she had hired professionals. She had been monetizing our relationship long before she asked for an actual loan. The defense attorney tried to paint Victoria as a victim of circumstances, a grieving woman who had made poor decisions while struggling with the trauma of her miscarriage and an abusive marriage. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed a pattern of deception going back years, long before any personal trauma could have justified her behavior. What struck me most during the trial was how Victoria's entire identity seemed to have been constructed around maintaining an image rather than building genuine substance. Her social media presence, her business model, even her marriage, everything had been carefully curated to project success and happiness while hiding the chaotic reality underneath. Expert witnesses testified about the psychology of fraud, explaining how some individuals become addicted to the thrill of deception, to the power that comes from manipulating others' perceptions. They described a condition where the person's sense of self becomes so dependent on external validation that they lose the ability to distinguish between their authentic self and their performed identity. During a break in the proceedings, I found myself in the courthouse bathroom, staring at my reflection in the harsh fluorescent lighting. How many conversations with Victoria had been genuine? How many moments of apparent vulnerability had been calculated to elicit a specific response from me? How much of our 22-year friendship had been real? The questions haunted me because I realized I might never know the answers. Victoria was such a skilled manipulator that even she might not know where the performance ended and her authentic self began. Perhaps there was no authentic self left to discover. When it was Victoria's turn to testify in her own defense, I watched as she tried to deploy the same charm and vulnerability that had worked so effectively in our personal relationship. But the courtroom was a different arena, one where facts mattered more than feelings, where documentation trumped charisma. She spoke about her difficult childhood, her struggles with self-worth, her genuine desire to help other women achieve the lifestyle she had worked so hard to attain. Some of it might even have been true. But interwoven with whatever authentic pain she had experienced were calculated lies designed to minimize her culpability and maximize sympathy. The jury saw through it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all charges. Victoria's face crumpled as the foreman read each count, but even in that moment of apparent devastation, I found myself wondering if her grief was genuine or performed. The victim impact statements were the most heartbreaking part of the entire process. Elderly couples who had lost their life savings. Young families forced into bankruptcy. Small business owners who had closed their shops after extending credit to Victoria's company that would never be repaid. One woman, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, spoke about how she had invested her entire pension with Victoria because she believed in supporting female entrepreneurs. "I trusted her because she reminded me of my own daughter," Margaret said, her voice shaking. She spoke about empowering women, about building something meaningful. "I thought I was investing in a better future for young women like herself." Margaret's words stayed with me long after the trial ended. Victoria hadn't just stolen money, she had weaponized trust, hope, and the desire to support other women. She had turned people's best instincts against them, using their generosity and optimism as tools for exploitation. The sentencing hearing was equally difficult. Victoria's mother flew in from Boston, an elegant woman in her 60s who looked like an older version of her daughter. She testified about Victoria's childhood, her academic achievements, her early dreams of making a positive impact on the world. "My daughter made terrible mistakes," Mrs. Ashford said, tears streaming down her face. "But she wasn't always like this. She was a good child, a loving daughter. I don't know where we went wrong." I wanted to tell Mrs. Ashford that it wasn't her fault, that some people are born with a fundamental inability to form genuine connections with others. But I stayed silent, knowing that nothing I could say would ease her pain or confusion. Victoria's father didn't attend the hearing. According to Victoria, they had been estranged for several years after a dispute about her business practices. I wondered now if he had seen through her deception earlier than the rest of us, if his withdrawal from her life had been an act of self-preservation rather than abandonment. During her own statement before sentencing, Victoria finally seemed to drop the performance entirely. She spoke quietly, without the theatrical gestures and calculated emotional peaks that had characterized her earlier testimony. She acknowledged the harm she had caused, the trust she had betrayed, the lives she had damaged. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, looking directly at the gallery full of her victims. "I don't even know if I deserve the chance to make amends. But I want you to know that I understand now what I've done. I understand that my actions weren't just crimes against your bank accounts. They were violations of your trust, your hope, your faith in other people." For a moment, I almost believed her. The words felt genuine in a way that nothing else she had said during the trial had felt. But then I caught myself, recognizing my own pattern of wanting to believe Victoria even when evidence suggested I shouldn't. Victoria was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Her house was seized to pay restitution to her victims, though the recovered assets covered only a fraction of what she had stolen. I never spoke to her again after that night at her house, but she wrote me several letters from prison. I threw most of them away unread, but one found its way into my hands during a moment of weakness about 3 years into her sentence. "Elena," it began, "I know you hate me and I understand why. But I need you to know that our friendship was real for me, even if I corrupted it with lies and manipulation. You were the only person who ever saw me as more than a performance, and I'm sorry I wasn't worthy of that gift." The letter went on for several pages, alternating between apologies and justifications, between acceptance of responsibility and subtle attempts to elicit sympathy. Even in prison, even after losing everything, Victoria couldn't help but perform. I burned the letter after reading it, watching the pages curl and blacken in our fireplace. Marcus found me there an hour later, staring into the dying flames. "Any regrets?" he asked gently. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the friendship? The years of support and loyalty? The trust that had been so thoroughly betrayed? "No," I said finally. "But I regret how long it took me to see who she really was." Marcus sat beside me on the hearth, his arm around my shoulders. People like Victoria are experts at hiding their true nature. They show us what we want to see, tell us what we want to hear. It's not your fault for believing in someone you loved. But I knew it was more complicated than that. I had chosen to believe Victoria's lies because they were easier than confronting difficult truths. I had ignored red flags because I enjoyed being part of her glamorous world. I had enabled her behavior because it made me feel special, chosen, important. The friendship had been real in some ways, but it had also been fundamentally unequal. Victoria had always been the star, and I had been content to play a supporting role. I had mistaken proximity to her success for my own worth, and I had confused her need for my services with genuine affection. Learning to trust my own judgment again took time. In therapy, ironic that the therapist needed therapy, I explored my patterns of friendship, my tendency to attract and enable narcissistic personalities. I learned to recognize the warning signs I had missed with Victoria, the way she always needed to be the center of attention, how she could never allow others to have their moments of celebration, the way she collected people based on their usefulness rather than genuine affection. Most importantly, I learned that true friendship requires reciprocity, honesty, and the ability to see and accept each other's flaws. Victoria had never been capable of any of those things. She had been incapable of seeing me as a separate person with my own needs and desires, instead viewing me as an extension of herself, a supporting character in the elaborate drama of her life. 5 years after Victoria's conviction, I received word that she had been released early for good behavior. Part of me wondered if she would try to contact me, if she would attempt to resume our friendship as if nothing had happened. But no call came, no letter arrived. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to a small town in Oregon, working as a sales associate in a clothing store and living in a modest apartment. The woman who had once commanded millions of dollars and lived in a mansion was now earning minimum wage and shopping at thrift stores. Some people might have seen it as poetic justice, but I felt only sadness for the waste of it all. Victoria had been genuinely talented in many ways, creative, charismatic, capable of inspiring others. If she had channeled those gifts honestly instead of using them to deceive and manipulate, she might have built something real and lasting. But perhaps that was asking too much. Perhaps Victoria had always been fundamentally incapable of honest success, always destined to choose the shortcut over the hard work, the performance over the reality. I think about her sometimes, especially when I'm working with clients who have been victims of similar manipulation. I wonder if prison changed her, if she ever truly understood the harm she had caused, if she was capable of building genuine relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. But those are questions I'll never have answered, and perhaps that's for the best. Some friendships are meant to end, some people are meant to remain in our past. Victoria taught me valuable lessons about trust, judgment, and the importance of maintaining my own identity within relationships. The girl who once rushed to rescue her friend from every crisis learned to recognize when someone's problems were actually their choices. The woman who once believed that loyalty meant never questioning a friend's behavior learned that real love sometimes requires difficult confrontations. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that it's better to be alone than to be with someone who sees you only as an audience for their performance. True friendship, like true love, requires authenticity, and some people are simply not capable of being authentic, even with those they claim to care about most. Victoria's story became a cautionary tale in my therapy practice, a reminder to clients about the importance of recognizing manipulation and maintaining healthy boundaries. But it also became a story about redemption, not Victoria's redemption, but my own. The redemption of learning to trust myself, to value my own judgment, to demand honesty and reciprocity in my relationships. Working with clients who had survived similar relationships became my specialty and my passion. Each person who walked into my office carried their own version of the story I had lived. The friend who borrowed money and never paid it back, the romantic partner who spun elaborate lies about their past, the family member who used guilt and emotional manipulation to control others. One client, Sarah, the coincidence of the name wasn't lost on me, had been in a friendship remarkably similar to mine with Victoria. Her best friend had been running multiple online fundraising campaigns for various fictitious emergencies, cancer treatments, house fires, family deaths. Each crisis had been carefully crafted to tug at heartstrings and open wallets, complete with fake medical documents and staged photographs. I gave her everything, Sarah told me during one of our sessions, tears streaming down her face. Not just money, but my emotional energy, my time, my trust. And she knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel guilty if I ever questioned her. Another client, David, had been systematically drained by a romantic partner who claimed to be waiting for an inheritance that never materialized. The relationship had lasted 3 years, during which David had paid for everything: rent, groceries, vacations, even his girlfriend's emergency medical procedures that later turned out to be cosmetic surgeries. The hardest part, David said, isn't the money I lost. It's wondering if any of it was real. Did she ever actually care about me, or was I just a convenient source of income? These sessions forced me to confront questions I had been avoiding about my own experience with Victoria. How much of our friendship had been genuine? Had she ever truly cared about me as a person, or had I simply been useful to her in ways I was only beginning to understand? The answer, I realized, was probably both. Human beings are complex creatures, capable of holding contradictory feelings simultaneously. Victoria might have genuinely enjoyed my company while also viewing me as an asset to be leveraged. She might have truly valued our shared memories while also calculating how to use our history to manipulate my current behavior. This complexity made healing more difficult but also more complete. I couldn't simply write off our entire friendship as a lie, because parts of it had been real. The late-night conversations about our dreams and fears, the laughter we had shared, the support we had provided each other through various life challenges. These experiences had shaped who I was, even if they had been contaminated by Victoria's ulterior motives. Learning to hold both truths simultaneously, that Victoria had cared about me and that she had manipulated me, was perhaps the most important lesson of my recovery. It taught me that people are capable of both genuine affection and calculated exploitation, sometimes within the same relationship, sometimes within the same conversation. This understanding made me a better therapist. I could help clients navigate the confusing aftermath of manipulative relationships without demanding that they categorize every interaction as either completely real or completely fake. People are messy, relationships are complicated, and healing requires accepting that complexity rather than seeking simple answers. I also learned to recognize the warning signs I had missed in my friendship with Victoria. The way she had always needed to be the center of attention, even during my important moments. The pattern of crises that required immediate intervention, preventing any careful consideration of whether her stories made sense. The guilt trips disguised as vulnerability, the way she would share just enough personal information to make me feel special and trusted, while actually revealing very little about her true self. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own instincts. The nagging doubts I had felt about Victoria's stories, the questions that had occurred to me but that I had dismissed as disloyal thoughts, those instincts had been trying to protect me. Learning to listen to them, to honor my own perceptions even when they conflicted with what I wanted to believe, became a crucial part of my emotional development. The work wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Each client I helped recover from a manipulative relationship was, in some way, helping me continue my own healing. Their courage in facing difficult truths inspired my own ongoing commitment to honesty and self-awareness. I started writing about these experiences, publishing articles in psychology journals about the long-term effects of manipulative friendships. The response was overwhelming. Emails from people around the world who recognized their own stories in my research, mental health professionals looking for guidance in treating similar cases, survivors seeking validation for experiences they had struggled to explain. One article, titled "The Hidden Trauma of Friendship Fraud," became the foundation for a book proposal. The publisher was interested in a broader exploration of how manipulative relationships damage our ability to trust others and ourselves, with practical guidance for recovery. Writing the book forced me to dive even deeper into my experience with Victoria. I interviewed dozens of other survivors, consulted with experts on narcissistic abuse, and researched the psychological mechanisms that make some people vulnerable to manipulation while others seem naturally resistant. What I discovered was that the most compassionate, empathetic people, those who naturally want to help others and assume the best about human nature, are often the most susceptible to manipulation. Their strengths become vulnerabilities in the hands of someone skilled at exploitation. This revelation was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant that my core values, kindness, loyalty, generosity, had made me a target. Liberating because it meant that being victimized wasn't a character flaw or sign of weakness, but rather a byproduct of having qualities that, in healthy relationships, are tremendously valuable. The book, Beautiful Lies: Surviving Manipulative Friendships, was published 3 years after Victoria's sentencing. It became a bestseller, resonating with readers who had their own versions of my story to tell. Book tours and speaking engagements followed, opportunities to share what I had learned with wider audiences. During one particularly memorable book reading, a woman in the audience raised her hand during the Q&A session. "How do you know if someone is manipulating you when it's happening?" she asked. "How do you recognize it in real time instead of only seeing it clearly in retrospect?" It was a question I had been asked many times, and I had developed a standard answer about trusting your instincts and watching for red flags. But something about this woman's expression, desperate, fearful, hopeful, made me pause and consider the question more deeply. "The truth is," I said finally, "it's almost impossible to see manipulation clearly when you're in the middle of it, especially from someone you love and trust. Manipulators are skilled at making their behavior seem normal, justified, even loving. But there are feelings you can learn to recognize: the constant sense that you're walking on eggshells, the feeling that you're always giving more than you're receiving, the exhaustion that comes from being someone's emotional support system without getting support in return." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and I knew she was living through her own version of what I had experienced with Victoria. After the event, she approached me privately. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar: a best friend who had borrowed money for various emergencies, who demanded constant emotional support but was never available when the tables were turned, who made her feel guilty for any attempt to set boundaries or ask questions. "I know what she's doing isn't right," the woman said, "but I can't bring myself to cut her off. What if she really does need my help? What if I'm being selfish or paranoid?" These were the exact questions I had asked myself about Victoria. The fear of being wrong, of abandoning someone who might genuinely need help, had kept me trapped in a harmful relationship long past the point when I should have walked away. Sometimes, I told her, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behavior. By constantly rescuing her from the consequences of her choices, you might be preventing her from getting the help she actually needs. It was advice I wish someone had given me years earlier, though I wasn't sure I would have been ready to hear it then. The success of the book led to other opportunities: a podcast about recovery from emotional abuse, consulting work with organizations trying to protect vulnerable populations from fraud, speaking engagements at conferences for mental health professionals. Each project deepened my understanding of manipulation and its effects, while also providing new avenues for helping others heal. But perhaps the most meaningful work remained the one-on-one therapy sessions with individual clients. In the quiet of my office, away from cameras and audiences, I could focus entirely on helping someone navigate their own path to recovery. Each person's story was unique, but the themes were often familiar: the slow erosion of self-trust, the confusion about what was real and what was performance, the struggle to maintain compassion for someone who had caused significant harm. One client, an elderly man named Robert, had been scammed by his own daughter. She had convinced him to invest his retirement savings in her various business ventures, all of which turned out to be elaborate fiction. The money was gone, but what hurt Robert most was the realization that his daughter had been lying to him for years about virtually every aspect of her life. "I taught her to ride a bike," he said during one session, his voice breaking. "I walked her down the aisle at her wedding. How could someone I love so much think so little of me that she would steal my future?" Robert's pain resonated deeply with my own experience. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was existential. When someone you love reveals themselves to be fundamentally different from who you thought they were, it shakes your confidence in your own judgment, your ability to read people, your understanding of human nature itself. Working with Robert and others like him taught me that recovery isn't just about learning to trust others again, it's about learning to trust yourself. The internal voice that says something isn't right here needs to be strengthened and honored, even when it conflicts with what we want to believe about someone we care about. This work became my mission and my calling. The woman who had once ignored her own instincts to maintain a friendship built on lies had become someone who helped others learn to listen to their inner wisdom, to value their own perceptions, to understand that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. The journey wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I was helping people or simply projecting my own experiences onto their situations. Supervision with a senior therapist helped me maintain professional boundaries while still drawing on my personal experience as a source of insight and empathy. I also had to be careful not to become overly suspicious or cynical. Not every friend who asked for help was a manipulator. Not every crisis was fabricated. Not every person who displayed narcissistic traits was a dangerous predator. Learning to distinguish between normal human flaws and truly destructive behavior patterns became an essential skill, both professionally and personally. In my own life, I found myself applying the lessons I was teaching others. New friendships were approached with appropriate caution, not paranoia but healthy skepticism. I paid attention to reciprocity, to whether conversations felt balanced, to how I felt after spending time with different people. I learned to say no without feeling guilty, to ask questions without apologizing, to trust my instincts even when they were inconvenient. The most surprising discovery was how much more I enjoyed relationships when they were built on genuine mutual respect rather than obligation, guilt, or the need to be needed. Friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide were more fun to be around, more supportive during difficult times, more willing to celebrate my successes without competition or resentment. Marcus and I grew closer through this process. He had seen the worst of what manipulation could do to someone he loved, and his patience during my recovery had been extraordinary. But more than that, he had been willing to speak difficult truths when I needed to hear them, even when doing so risked conflict in our relationship. "You're different now," he told me one evening as we sat on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Stronger. More yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. For years, I had been performing a version of myself that I thought would maintain my friendship with Victoria. The endlessly patient confidant, the loyal supporter, the woman who never questioned or demanded too much. Dropping that performance had been terrifying at first, but ultimately liberating. The real me was more assertive than I had allowed myself to be in years. More willing to express needs and boundaries. More capable of saying, "That doesn't sound right," or "I need more information," without feeling like I was being disloyal or unkind. This authenticity extended beyond my relationship with Marcus to every area of my life. At work, I stopped accepting clients whose treatment goals conflicted with my professional values. In friendships, I began expressing my own needs instead of always focusing on what others needed from me. In family relationships, I set clearer boundaries about what kinds of behavior I would and wouldn't tolerate. None of this was easy. Changing lifelong patterns never is. But each small step toward authenticity made the next one easier, until living honestly became more natural than performing had ever been. The hardest part was forgiving myself for the years I had spent enabling Victoria's behavior. The money I had given her over the years in small amounts, lunch tabs I always picked up, gifts that were never reciprocated, emergency loans that were never repaid. The emotional energy I had expended being her unpaid therapist, crisis counselor, and constant source of validation. But I learned that self-forgiveness, like forgiveness of others, isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about releasing the burden of anger and regret that keeps you trapped in the past. I had made mistakes, but I had made them from a place of love and loyalty. Learning to honor those intentions while still acknowledging the harm they had caused became part of my ongoing growth. Recovery, I discovered, isn't a destination but a process. There were still moments when I questioned my own judgment, still times when I felt guilty for setting boundaries or asking difficult questions. But these moments became less frequent and less intense over time, replaced by growing confidence in my ability to navigate relationships with both compassion and wisdom. The work I was doing, helping others heal from manipulative relationships, became not just my profession but my purpose. Each client who learned to trust their instincts again, each person who developed the courage to leave a harmful relationship, each survivor who reclaimed their sense of self-worth, represented a small victory against the forces that had once controlled my own life. In the end, perhaps that was Victoria's greatest gift to me, forcing me to grow beyond the naive girl who had confused drama with excitement, manipulation with love, and proximity to success with personal worth. She taught me, through her absence, what real friendship actually looks like, and for that lesson, despite everything else, I remain grateful. The perfect life Victoria had constructed was revealed to be a house of cards, beautiful from a distance but ultimately hollow and unsustainable. But in its collapse, I discovered something more valuable: the imperfect but genuine life I could build on a foundation of honesty, authenticity, and real love. And that, I realized, was worth far more than any performance could ever be. Years later, when clients ask me how to spot a manipulative friend or toxic relationship, I tell them to watch for the patterns I missed with Victoria. The friend whose crises always coincide with your successes. The person who collects allies based on what they can provide rather than who they are. The individual who views relationships as performances rather than genuine connections. Most importantly, I tell them to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone's story doesn't add up, keep asking questions. If a friend consistently makes you feel drained rather than energized, it may be time to reevaluate the relationship. The 34-year-old woman who had rushed to Victoria's house that autumn morning had been naive, codependent, and willing to sacrifice her own judgment for the sake of maintaining a friendship. The woman I became understood that true loyalty sometimes means saying no, that real love requires honesty even when it's painful, and that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Victoria's elaborate deception had cost many people their savings, their trust, and their faith in human nature. But it had also taught valuable lessons about the importance of due diligence, healthy skepticism, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. In my practice, I now specialize in helping people recover from relationships with narcissistic and manipulative individuals. The work is challenging but rewarding, helping others recognize the patterns I was once blind to, teaching them to rebuild their sense of self-worth and judgment. Sometimes former clients send me updates about their lives, new relationships built on mutual respect, career changes that reflect their true values, friendships that energize rather than drain them. These stories remind me that healing is possible, that we can learn from our worst experiences and use them to create better lives. The girl who once believed that being chosen by someone glamorous made her special learned that being valued by someone genuine was infinitely more precious. The woman who once confused drama with excitement discovered that peace and stability were actually signs of health, not boredom. And the friend who once enabled manipulation in the name of loyalty learned that the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when they don't want to hear it, even when it costs you the relationship, even when it means standing alone. Victoria's perfect life had been a mirage, beautiful and compelling from a distance, but ultimately empty and unsustainable. But from its ashes I built something real, a life based on authenticity, healthy boundaries, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to trust again, more carefully this time, but with an open heart. The performance was over. Real life, with all its imperfections and genuine connections, could finally begin.